on in then to what we will be covering this evening. So get my slides to work. Please do shout if my slides are not clear or you can't hear me at any point. But just to go over what I'm hoping to touch on this evening with you guys is firstly just a very brief overview of what is endometriosis and common symptoms. But we of course won't spend too much of time on that. I'm sure you're all very knowledgeable in that area. But then we'll go into looking at what the link between endometriosis and nutrition is, and why we kind of have a look at nutrition specifically in terms of symptom management. What I really want to kind of get across this evening is practical top tips. So I'll give an overview of that kind of current research, but all that research is no good if we can't translate it into practical things that we can apply into our day-to-day. So I'll end off with some key take-home messages and touch on some kind of frequently asked questions and some questions that have been submitted by people in advance. So looking at what is endometriosis. It's a disease in which tissue that is similar to, but not completely the same, the uterus grows outside the uterus. It impacts up to 1 in 10 women, or that equates to about 190 million women and girls worldwide. But the true prevalence really is not exactly known due to the likes of difficulties in diagnosing and delays in diagnosing the condition. The cells or the endometrial tissue respond to hormone fluctuations that occur across your menstrual cycle, which can cause pain, inflammation, etc. in the surrounding tissue. So, although there is no cure, research is starting to point towards dietary changes as playing a role in managing symptoms, reducing inflammation, and supporting fertility. Nutrition strategies should be tailored to you individually, however, and meet your needs, your symptoms, etc. And hopefully then will help to ease discomfort and symptoms that you're experiencing, overall looking to improve quality of life and overall well-being. So in terms of common symptoms then, and again, another point I'd really like to highlight here is that every individual experiences their endometriosis in a unique way. So the symptoms that you might come across, what might work for you in your nutrition, can differ greatly even between other individuals on this call. Common symptoms, though, are the likes of your pelvic pain and painful periods, menstrual bleeding that's abnormal, pain during or after intercourse, some GI or gastrointestinal symptoms, and we'll go into a good bit of detail on that today, discomfort during toileting, so both during urination and for bowel movements, and then a common one being fatigue as well. So, in terms of the link between nutrition and endometriosis, and why do we think about nutrition? I didn't put this kind of confusing looking diagram up for the purpose of confusing anyone. It's more to show how it's not a straightforward but a complex area. The evidence is growing to support the role of dietary and nutritional interventions as an adjunct or an add-on management of endometriosis-related pain and GI symptoms. So diet and nutrition can impact kind of key players within our body relating to endometriosis, such as, but very much not limited to, the likes of our inflammation, hormones like estrogen, and gut microbiome, which you can see circled in this infographic. So, to be very clear, although the research that's coming out that's emerging is kind of exciting, showing some promise, and there's definitely some really positive feedback coming from them, it doesn't mean that any of the research is 100% concrete or definitive yet, meaning that there's no one-size-fits-all endo diet. Okay, what will we look at then? So if there's no one-size-fits-all, what are we going to look at this evening? So specific nutrition considerations in endometriosis is looking at the impact of inflammation and the diet. Also looking at gut and digestive health and why that's important in endo. a brief touch on hormone balance and nutrition, and then I'm sure plenty of people have come across exclusion diets on social media, etc. We'll speak about those briefly, and then one that always comes up is that supplements. We always lead with food first, but in some scenarios, supplements may or may not be indicated. Okay, to start with then, we're looking at inflammation and the diet. And I'm sure plenty of people have come across the anti-inflammatory diet before. But before we go into looking at inflammation and endo and diet, just to understand exactly what we mean by inflammation. So firstly, you have acute inflammation, which is a very healthy short-term response by the body. This helps to protect us against threats like infection or injury, and that's very normal. The contrast, though, is chronic inflammation, which is persistent, low-level immune response that can lead to a worsening of a disease, including endometriosis. So a characteristic of endo is that chronic state of inflammation, and dietary suggestions focus on those which help to then reduce that inflammation. The evidence points towards an anti-inflammatory style diet for managing symptoms, as well as the severity of endometriosis, and also the potential to help improve fertility for those looking for it. So in terms of key areas to consider then, we have components of our diet that can be seen as pro-inflammatory, so more likely to cause that inflammation, as well as those that are anti-inflammatory. So in terms of those that we know are more likely to be pro-inflammatory, it's such as your animal fat, your red meats, processed foods, and then added sugars. So what does that mean in terms of what should we be looking at reducing or minimizing in our diet? So processed foods are things like crisps, biscuits, pastries, also looking at the likes of fried foods and certain margarines. It just means we need to be really mindful of our red meat consumption. I'll touch on that a bit later. And then also animal fats. We ideally want to be moving towards the more plant-based fats with some exceptions. So what to increase then? So what's in that anti-inflammatory side of things? Firstly, looking at the dietary fats. So EFAs are essential fatty acids, and we're looking at both what we call monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So we're looking for things like olive oil, avocados, nuts for those monos, and then for polyunsaturated are our lovely omega-3s, which are really key players. So oily fish is going to be one of your key sources here, the likes of your salmon, mackerel, sardines. They provide us with what we call EPA and DHA, which are two omega-3 fats known for their anti-inflammatory effects. A higher intake of omega-3 fatty acids may help to reduce severity of pelvic pain and inflammation in particular. So that's an area where the research seems to suggest its specific use within endometriosis. So that's looking at dietary fats. What about other elements that are other components that are anti-inflammatory that we'd want to include in? And I'm sure we've come across the term antioxidants before. So increasing the intake of antioxidants within the diet can be helpful for that reduction in inflammation. But what exactly are they? They're chemicals that remove potentially damaging substances called free radicals from our body. Examples of them are vitamin C and vitamin E, and having a diet high in foods containing these antioxidants might help to reduce symptoms of endo. The evidence is new, exciting, it's building. It may also be why a diet high in the likes of your fruit, particularly citrus fruit, can help to reduce the risk of endometriosis. So, starting to bring it now into more of a, rather than me saying, here's the research, it's kind of going, okay, how can we start thinking about applying this? And a structure that we look at that can be really useful to bring in a lot of these anti-inflammatory components is, as the name would suggest, the anti-inflammatory diet, or you may have heard of the Mediterranean diet. It's kind of seen as one of the gold stars for healthy eating. Although there's some slight differences between anti-inflammatory diets and Mediterranean diets, I'm going to combine the two for the purposes of this webinar. So the slight differences are in anti-inflammatory diets, there tends to be a little bit more diversity and variety. And there also is a bit more of a emphasis on herbs and spices, but otherwise they're quite similar. To put it into kind of really tangible terms, what do we mean and how could we apply that Mediterranean or anti-inflammatory diet then? So think on a day-to-day basis to start. We're going to go with daily, including ideally whole or unprocessed foods. So using more whole food options where possible. We don't want to 100% demonize processed foods, which we see a lot of that on social media these days. Some foods do need a slight degree of processing to be able to consume them, but where possible, we're going with foods that look pretty similar to how they've come out of the ground, for example. Then including plenty, and to put a bit of a number on plenty, we're thinking at least 7 portions of colourful fruit and veg each day. Emphasis there being on the colourful as well. The more colours, the better. The different colours actually correspond with the different antioxidants, vitamins, etc. that the foods are rich in. So you think if we include more colours, the more likely we are to get the range of what we require. If anyone can remember the Skittles ad, Taste the Rainbow, think that, except in relation to the fruit and veg. And then we also want to think about on a daily basis, including nuts and seeds. For example, nut butters, adding nuts to snacks, putting seeds on yogurts, on breakfast, onto salads, cashews on stir fries, etc. So adding those in as regularly as possible. Herbs and spices. We want to make use of those as much as possible in our cooking. They are great for that anti-inflammatory effect. It can be a good alternative to the likes of added salt or ketchups and other sauces to be able to use herbs and spices to really bring out flavour. There was also kind of a side note, but there was also recent study to show that spices and herbs can be quite useful in terms of weight management as well. When we have spiced foods well or flavoured them well, we're actually less likely to overconsume and to stop when we're full with them. And then also looking in terms of daily basis, using ideally olive oil where we can, extra virgin olive oil as our main oil source. Then looking at kind of weekly, so they're kind of day-to-day checklists, taking those off. Weekly then, we want to make sure we're, where possible, and if it's to your preference, including seafood, which includes at least 1 to 2 portions of oily fish per week. So that's because of those omega-3s that I've already mentioned as being really key players. So with that, we think an oily fish is our salmon, mackerel, trout, etc. But also including likes of prawns or whitefish can be really beneficial too. Legumes. This is one that can be brought in on a daily basis, but for a lot of people, it can be just useful to identify a couple of meals across your week that maybe you could turn into a plant-based meal using the likes of your lentils, chickpeas, beans, etc. Or use it as a way to top up your fibre intake within meals. For example, if you're making a stir fry, chicken in half a tin of chickpeas can really bump up that fibre intake. Then I'm more of a what can we add in kind of person. There is very much a need to think about some elements that we want to either minimise or reduce in the diet. And when it comes to the Mediterranean diet, as well as in endometriosis specifically, we know that being very mindful of our red meat intake can be quite beneficial. It doesn't mean no red meat whatsoever. We just want to ideally be choosing lean cuts of meat where possible and sticking to 1 to 2 portions of red meat maximum. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to start including it if you don't have red meat in your diet currently. It just means if you're currently having it, it's okay to continue at 1 to 2. Often people think about red meat being a really useful source of iron in the diet. Just to be aware, if iron levels or iron deficiency is something you struggle with, including red meat in your diet once to twice per week actually won't be enough to be able to bring up those iron levels away from that kind of deficiency marker. So it's really only something that if you're currently having, maybe you can continue, but otherwise, it doesn't necessarily need to be there. Okay. So just to kind of summarize on this bit, although research and the data surrounding anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean diets and endometriosis is limited, some has shown that it actually can have quite a beneficial impact on symptoms, specifically looking at reducing period pain through reducing things called prostaglandins. And then recent research has also concluded that there is an association between omega-3s, which there's a huge benefit on, there's a huge emphasis on in this diet, and also fiber from fruit and veg, and the anti-inflammatory effects that we specifically see in endometriosis. Okay, I've mentioned already antioxidant-rich foods, but I mentioned them kind of in terms, or antioxidants. I mentioned them in terms of kind of vitamin C and E, but we don't sit down to the plate of vitamin C and E, do we? We kind of think about where we're going to get these in food terms. So foods that are naturally rich in antioxidants include predominantly colourful foods. So things to include regularly are the likes of your berries, blueberries, strawberries, etc. Just to note, frozen can be equally as good as fresh, and also a lot more cost effective. Citrus fruit are a really good one to be including. And then walnuts and pecans, alongside a lot of other nuts, can be really good for those antioxidants. Fruits like your apricots and your apples. A lovely one to include as maybe an evening snack is your dark chocolate, and then really vibrant foods like beetroot too. Rather than kind of getting too bogged down and having to tick off a checklist of specific antioxidant-rich foods, if you incorporate a wide variety of colourful fruits and vegetables into your meals, so ideally at least 2 colours per meal, it can boost your antioxidant intake naturally without having to think too much about it. Okay, so that was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of thinking about that inflammation, the anti-inflammatory diet, and how that impacts or is associated with endometriosis. But now I'd quite like to move on to looking at gut health and digestive health in endo. So it's specifically looking at the management of active endometriosis with a focus on improving that gut health. So firstly, why is gut health so important, particularly in endo? Well, the bowel is located right beside the gut, and alongside that, it also eliminates excess hormones and toxins. So it's really important that your bowels open frequently to help manage those endo symptoms, as well as flushing out those extra hormones and toxins. And it's proposed that by avoiding constipation and ensuring your bowels open regularly, that it can help better manage your endometriosis. Even in the absence of endo, having good digestive health has more of an impact than just on feelings of, say, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, all those things. The gut is kind of the powerhouse of the body in a lot of ways, and has a lot more functions than just digesting food. When it comes to really honing in on that gut and digestive health in endo, though, the reason for that is that studies have shown that 80% of individuals with endometriosis have some sort of gastrointestinal issues. So that is a pretty big number. So you can understand then why there's been a lot of focus and research. Well, there will be a lot of emerging research on this in the future. So if we think about simple areas to focus on to help support that gut health, the first one that jumps to mind is increasing fiber. The kind of recommendations are to try and hit roughly 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. But I really want to highlight that this should be done gradually rather than too quickly, because if we really go with, I'm sure we've heard the term fiber maxing, straight away, it can actually lead to constipation. So, as well as kind of building gradually with the likes of your whole grains, fruits, vegetables, etc., we also want to make sure that we stay hydrated. So, drinking plenty of water helps that fiber to work effectively and prevent any potential constipation. Probiotic foods and fermented foods are an area worth looking at as well. So that's things like your live yogurts or kefir. Fermented foods are the likes of your kimchi, sauerkraut, etc. Some people find these a little bit difficult to tolerate, but if you can, they're really useful to include in the diet and also delicious. We will look a little bit more at exclusion diets in terms of, say, gluten-free and low FODMAP diets. But it's just to be aware that these are also predominantly used when trying to address gut health issues. A food and symptom diary can be a really useful tool to help identify specific triggers, but it's important to remember that it can take up to 24 hours to see a gut response or symptom from a food. So it's not necessarily the symptom that you experience straight away after a meal. It could actually be in relation to even what you had the day before. We also know that hypervigilance, so by that I mean like keeping a really detailed diary and obsessing over it, can lead to greater levels of stress, which can actually then worsen symptoms. And this is due to the something we call the gut-brain axis, because we know that stress can worsen gut symptoms. Okay, so looking then briefly at hormones and nutrition. So in endometriosis specifically, so why do we focus on that, and how can nutrition really have an impact on our hormones? Firstly, the reason why we look at that is that endometrial cells thrive in high estrogen environments. We know that many women with endo have a hormone imbalance, mainly looking at too much or estrogen dominance. So what we want to think about then to help support or balance hormones, and there's a lot of this on social media again, influencers talking about balancing your hormones and specific things like coffee first thing in the morning causing you to have an imbalance of hormones, etc. It's not that simple, but what we do know that can potentially support is something as simple as a meal routine. So it's really key. Avoiding skipping meals and avoiding really long gaps between meals and avoiding having erratic mealtime can be really beneficial. Our bodies, our menstrual cycles, our hormones love a routine. We'll go into a bit more detail on balancing meals towards the end when I bring in some really practical tips, but having balanced meals can be super useful and important. And then also looking at some of the things that are crossover with what we talked about earlier in terms of that anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean diet. And it's looking at reducing the trans-saturated fatty acids, so that's animal fats predominantly. A study has shown that actually if we were to decrease our saturated fat intake by half, it can lead to our estrogen decreasing, our free estrogen decreasing by 20%, which can then have a positive impact on symptoms. Again, bringing in that minimizing or limiting red meat, so once to twice per week maximum if you're having it currently. When it comes to processed meat, so processed packet hams or pies and those kinds of things, ideally we're looking at just not having those. Minimizing red meat, cutting out processed meat would be my advice. Interestingly as well then, if we look at some veg that can have an impact or seem to have an impact on our hormones, cruciferous veg, aka our kind of leafy greens, we're thinking Brussels sprouts, broccoli, kale, that kind of thing, they have they can potentially help our liver to clear excess estrogen. That's just put it in a simplified way, but there is actually some research to show that that can be helpful. And then in terms of when we're looking at alcohol and endo, I have to say that the research that we have on it is by no means concrete. It's very limited, but it is something to very much be mindful of, particularly if you notice symptoms yourself, that it can impact those inflammation and kind of hormonal fluctuation symptoms. Okay. A couple other hormone specific things. I actually didn't add it on the slide, but I find these really important to get the message across. The first one is on plastics and the impact that plastics can have on our hormones. Now, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't want to go scaremonger, but it's just being quite mindful of how we reheat our foods is kind of the one thing to think about. If you look a lot of this up online, they're going to say that microplastics are everywhere and to be worried about it. But really, if we think about just maybe potentially switching to glass containers, food containers, or heating things up on plates and bowls instead, we'd kind of see a benefit in that. Because the research has shown that those kind of plastic particles can mimic estrogen in our body, which then may worsen endometriosis. And then another area to touch on briefly here as well is soya. So this is one that's kind of received a bit of heat over the years as to, is it good, is it not good? We know that soya can have an impact on our estrogen, but there's currently not enough evidence to show that it actually negatively impacts women with endometriosis. So it really just suggests that including some soya in your diet shouldn't be a problem. And actually some research says it might even help with endo symptoms. All right, so looking then at exclusion diets and endometriosis. So I'm sure plenty of people have come across the three that I have up on the screen. Now, just to highlight, there are so many other exclusion diets out there, but I don't necessarily have the time to go into all of them today. But the one really important point I want to make in terms of exclusion diets is that if you do decide that they may be something that would be beneficial to try for you, please look to maybe do this under supervision of a healthcare professional or registered dietitian. So when we look at avoiding full food groups, it leaves us at a risk of deficiencies or also reducing diversity in our diet, which can negatively impact your gut microbiome in the long term. As we've already discussed, our gut health is super important, particularly in endometriosis. If there is any history of any form of eating disorders or disordered eating as well, I would be very reluctant to advise exclusion diets. But rather than just talk completely negatively about them, and the research is not concrete on any of these, but anecdotally, some people are saying that they're finding, for example, gluten-free is helping symptoms, and we know that there is a place for the likes of our low FODMAP diet. So let's just talk about them briefly. Start off with low FODMAP. So what exactly are FODMAPs then? So it's really just an acronym, but what they are fermentable carbohydrates that we find in the body. So our resident gut microbiome or bacteria breaks down these foods in our gut and causes fermentation, which then causes gases to be produced. For many individuals, this isn't an issue, doesn't cause any problems, but for people that have, say, for example, irritable bowel syndrome or IBS-like symptoms, this can cause things like bloating, constipation, diarrhea, or a combination of them all. And in terms of thinking about that in endo, as we know, avoiding constipation is so key. And when you're experiencing pain, that kind of thing, the last thing you need is extra pressure on your stomach from the likes of bloating, for example. So it is used kind of as a diagnostic tool. So that's what it's kind of known for being useful for, is a diagnostic tool in IBS clients. But when it comes to endometriosis, it can be tricky to know if it is the FODMAPs that are causing symptoms or not. How we go about a low FODMAP diet, it's a short-term diet. That's the first kind of real thing to bear in mind. It's not meant as a long-term solution. So we look to remove foods that are high in FODMAPs. So that's things like our onions and garlics are key ones. Certain vegetables, our dairy products because of lactose, and then our wheat products. There are others in there too. But we look to reduce and minimize the intake of those foods for, say, roughly 4 to 6 weeks, and then in a methodical way reintroduce them, allowing you to see which foods may be potential triggers, which ones to avoid, or simply just limit in your diet. So there have been studies that show that one back in 2017, I think it was, showed that I think there was a 72% reduction in those who had endometriosis and IBS who followed a low FODMAP diet, or 72% of them who followed a low FODMAP diet had 50% improvement in their bowel symptoms. But it kind of, again, is difficult to truly identify if this improvement was due to the reduction in FODMAPs alone, or if there was other if those improvements lasted long term. Bearing in mind, when people go on to these kind of exclusion diets or new kind of diet, they tend to cook from scratch a lot more because they're not as sure what they can and can't have, meaning that they tend to have less processed foods in there as well. The other side of it is, and this leads nicely into our gluten-free and our dairy-free diet, is that if we look at, say, for example, a gluten-free diet, some people have reported that there's been a benefit to their symptoms following this, but it also is tricky because gluten-containing foods such as wheat contain FODMAPs. So again, there's kind of crossover and it's hard to know. When it comes to gluten, we really need a lot more research on this and endometriosis. But again, some women have reported improvement of symptoms when excluding it from their diet. So if it's something that you feel may be of benefit to you, it is something that you could do alongside a healthcare professional or a registered dietitian. But before trying this, it's really important to rule out celiac disease. So celiac disease is an autoimmune condition, which means that you're sensitive to gluten. There seems to be a slight increased link between the prevalence of celiac in individuals with endometriosis compared to individuals who do not have endometriosis. So the reason why it's super important to get it ruled out first is for the test for celiac disease to be accurate, you have to have gluten in your diet for the 2 weeks leading up to it. So if you are following a gluten-free diet, then rather than looking at just completely removing these foods, we look to replace them. And in an ideal world, we'd be replacing them with foods that are naturally gluten-free. There's a lot on the free from shelves these days, so foods that have been manufactured to be gluten-free. But just to be aware that those foods often are highly processed, have added sugar, salt, and added fat in there, which we know will probably not be good for that inflammation side of things. Foods that are naturally gluten-free are the likes of your potatoes, sweet potato, rice, quinoa, etc. And also, not to mention, gluten-free products are actually far more expensive and lower in fibre naturally. Finally, then, in terms of our exclusion diet, looking at that dairy-free side of stuff, just like to highlight that dairy has gotten a bad rap in regards to endo over the years. And in fairness, it's because the research has been a bit up and down. But the most recent research or review of all the research actually suggests that it could be an unexpected ally in endo due to its anti-inflammatory effects and the calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus content. If you do tolerate it, it's good to have kind of 2 to 3 portions of dairy per day. But some people may find that they're sensitive to lactose. Again, lactose being a high FODMAP food. So in that case, rather than just cutting it out, it can be best to try a lactose-free milk or a fortified milk alternative. So fortified, making sure that it's got added vitamin C in particular added in. To be able to support good gut bacteria or the microbiome, ideally we want to avoid eliminating any full food group, but instead replacing them. For example, as I mentioned with the dairy, it's important to include a calcium fortified alternative. With that, we have plant-based milks, including soy milk is okay to include. So we want to make sure when we think about fortified, often most fortified plant-based products on the shelves, often most of them are fortified, but organic ones are not. So being mindful of when you think you might be choosing a healthier alternative by going organic, it might not actually be fortified and you'd be missing out on that calcium piece. All right, so that was kind of a few bits of practical sprinkled in there, but in a way I've been talking predominantly about that kind of research component. So let's get into kind of how do I apply all of this to my day-to-day eating in a really practical way. So some of this might seem in some ways simple, basic, but a really key thing is to focus on nailing the basics first. We talked about the importance of building balanced meals for hormone health. Balanced meals and a meal routine can be really good for keeping those bowels regular, and then also can act as a good base to be able to apply the anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean diet principles. So some general guidelines. And I always advise clients that rather than thinking about your day as a whole being balanced, think about each meal. It feels like a lot more of a manageable task when you just look to balance each meal at a time. Start off with a serving of protein. Ideally, as we know, trying to think about that anti-inflammatory effect, we're going with the lean protein options where possible, like your lean meats, chicken, turkey, etc. Fish is wonderful to include in. Don't forget about those omega-3s. It's okay to include the likes of your tofu and tempeh, which are plant-based sources. Soya plant-based sources, but again, if you're thinking along the plant-based sources, we maybe don't necessarily want to be going towards the likes of our corn or really processed ones. Again, we're trying to minimize the consumption of processed foods. And legumes are the likes of your chickpeas, lentils, etc. can be good protein sources there. Then step 2, we're thinking of where's my energy coming from? It comes from carbohydrates. What kind of carbohydrates do I want to have? Ideally, whole grains. So that's going to be your whole grain breads, pittas, wraps, etc. When we're thinking about whole grain, we want to go for the high fiber options where possible. And a good rule of thumb is to check the back of the package, look for the table, find where it says fiber. Per 100 grams of that food, you're looking for at least 6 grams of fiber. That can just be a good rule of thumb. Beans and lentils, chickpeas are also not only a good source of plant-based protein, but also can be really useful carbohydrates too. And then we move on to looking at our lovely rainbow of fruit, veg, salad, berries, etc. Trying to have at least 2 to 3 portions of them in each meal. Ideally, if we can, adding in at least 2 colours per meal. Last but not least, we want to tick off the box of our healthy fats. So, such as cooking with our olive oil, adding in avocado, nuts, seeds, etc. When we think about healthy fats, we just want to be very mindful of our portion sizes there. The reason for that is if we think practically, for every gram of protein or every gram of carbohydrate that we have in the diet, gives us about 4 calories, whereas a gram of fat gives about 9 calories. So it's just a lot more energy dense. Doesn't mean we want to completely reduce or get rid of it. It just means that we want to be mindful of portion size. So thinking then about some practical swaps to make sure that the dietary fat that we have in our diets are ones that are going to be more anti-inflammatory and better options. So you can see we're moving away from that saturated or trans fat options towards those healthier unsaturated, polyunsaturated options. Trying to minimize the likes of butter and lard, going more for your olive oil or seed oils, avocado oil, etc. Instead of doing a creamy based sauce with heavy cream, perhaps look towards using the likes of your tomato based sauces, or if you want something creamy, use the likes of your yogurt based kind of alternatives instead. Rather than your fatty cuts of meat, we're thinking chicken without skin on, turkey, fish, using the likes of grilling rather than frying, etc. And then instead of having kind of, say, the snacks or packaged foods like pastries, pies, we're looking to think about, say, nuts, seeds, or baking our own, whether it's flapjacks or oat bars with olive oil instead of using lots of butter. The last one then says about cheese heavy snacks. I'd like to highlight that some cheese is actually good for you, good for your heart health, got protein in it, lovely calcium, etc. We don't want to have too many high cheesy toppings or sauces or snacks because of the level of fat in there. So instead of that, we're thinking hummus, so avocados, guacamole, or nut butters. All right, using the same principle then of going, how can we do practical swaps for fibre then? So going from the lower fibre to the higher, less processed fibre options. Really simple one. Rather than your white bread or toast, let's go to the whole grain or seeded. Checking to the back of the packet, does it have at least 6 grams of fibre per 100 grams of food? If you're not in love with that, start off with some 50-50 bread, or make a sandwich with one slice of white and one slice of whole grain bread, and transition yourself onto the more whole grain options. White pasta, white rice, again, looking to just do those simple swaps of whole wheat, or actually trying out lentil or chickpea pasta if you haven't before. Brown rice is good, but you can also go with the likes of wild rice. Basmati is also absolutely fine. Or a completely different option would be your quinoa or bulgur wheat. Simple one in the morning, rather than having the likes of your cornflakes or Cocoa Pops or low fibre cereals. Can we think about those wonderful porridge oats, bran flakes, muesli, etc.? Ideally going for those breakfast cereals that have less than 5 grams of sugar per 100 grams of the food. And a good thing to know actually is some of the little own brand options now have naturally brought down the sugar content of their breakfast cereals, even the likes of their bran flakes and cornflakes. Rather than snacking on crisps and biscuits, thinking about those lovely nuts, seeds, oat cakes, etc. And then rather than thinking about having fruit juices, can we switch to the whole fruit option? A really simple one in dinner then is actually simply, rather than just having peeled mashed potatoes, can we just go to potatoes with the skin on? It doesn't even have to be sweet potato. It can be normal potato with the skin on. Baby potatoes can be great for that. Sweet potatoes, butternut squash, pumpkin, they're all great ones for the fibre content too. I want to include a little bit as well on lentils, peas, beans, because these are ones that really do pack a punch when it comes to fibre and can really help that gut health element. So really simple ways to be able to chuck these in to increase that fibre across the day or across the week. Those lentil pouches, or you can also get, say, lentil and chickpea pouches, or quinoa and rice pouches that are microwavable. They are super handy, particularly times where you're coming up to your period, you're really not feeling like cooking, but you need to have some form of whole grain carbs alongside the easy protein and veg that you've prepared. pop that in the microwave and it'll be done. Adding a tin of lentils or chickpeas to likes of lentils to your spaghetti bolognese or casseroles, or you can go chickpeas into curries or stir fries. Bean burgers can be a lovely one. Adding things like hummus onto snacks or into sandwiches. Falafel is wonderful as well. And then even trying the likes of roasted chickpeas as a snack. Add a bit of paprika, again, those herbs and spices, and they're delicious. All right, so one thing that I really would like to kind of hammer home again is the fact that when it comes to managing symptoms in relation to gut health, we want to really avoid or manage constipation where possible. I'm going to talk through some kind of first line advice here, but if you're not finding any benefit from that first line advice, please do look for qualified or help from a qualified healthcare professional. First and foremost, and this is good advice across the board for constipation or otherwise, think about a meal routine. So developing 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks, that kind of routine can be really helpful to prevent your gut from being sluggish, because the muscle needs constant reminder to contract faster. So make sure that every meal and snack that you have has a fiber source in there as well. I highlighted this earlier, but be sure to gradually increase fiber so that you actually don't worsen constipation in the short term. And any increase in fiber, you want to make sure you're matching this increase with enough fluids. So at least 2 liters per day. Looking at then that toileting position, I'm not sure if people have come across this image before, but we naturally weren't designed to sit upright on a loo whilst going to the bathroom. So particularly for people who are a little bit on the shorter side, such as myself, looking to have a stool under your feet to be able to raise your feet and your knees, and leaning forward a bit can make it a lot easier to actually go to the loo. Also think about relaxation techniques. One that I've learned recently that helps clients a lot is actually saying the word moo as you go. This can really help with relaxing and prevent kind of holding on to anything. Movement and exercise, when it comes to gut motility, any kind is helpful here, whether it's stretching, yoga, etc., or a gentle walk. Any movement can be really beneficial to keep the gut going. And then useful, what I refer to as trigger foods for when you feel you really need to go. The old one that I'm sure we've all heard of before is prunes. So around 6 actual prunes or 100 grams per day, or kiwis. 2 of those a day can be really helpful. If you want to include those in the evening, they can also have a benefit on helping sleep too. Then adding things like chia seeds, whether that's through a chia pudding as a lovely snack or chia jam. Coffee can be a really good stimulant. A strong coffee can be as much of a stimulant on the gut as a large meal. Or having your likes of hot milk and honey with or without an espresso shot can really help. So when you're thinking about, okay, how do I put all this together? I'm thinking about my balanced meals. I know this week is going to be really busy, or I'm just not in the headspace. I'm in a lot of pain at the moment. How can you set yourself up for success and make it as easy as possible for you on those busy days? Planning ahead is so key here. So I'm not sure how clear it is on your screen, but I've put in, these are actually resources that I put together for clients myself. A meal planner and a corresponding shopping list planner. Think about the 4 categories of I need protein, I need my whole grain carbs, my colorful veggies, and then healthy fats and other herbs, spices, or other ingredients there. Plan your meal like that so you can write a corresponding shopping list. Another really useful thing can be to find recipes that you know that are easy to batch cook. Pop those in the freezer. So that on days where you really don't feel like cooking, it's a really simple meal ready to go. So I know I'm kind of zooming through these last couple of slides. I'm just conscious of time. I want to make sure I get through them all. I've included a sample day here, sample meal plan. I don't often like to provide a one size fits all, but just to give you an idea of how simple this can be. It's thinking about, how do I have my porridge in the morning with my dairy, which I know can be helpful in terms of anti-inflammatory effects, my calcium, etc. My nuts and seeds, which we know have an anti-inflammatory effect, my berries, for example, that can be a really great start to the day. Snacks can be something as simple as sliced fruit with some nut butter and a lovely milky coffee on the side, or the likes of your hummus and veg sticks. Lunch, this is actually what I had today, so this is where that inspiration came from. Again, choosing whole grain carbohydrates, so a whole grain bagel with some cream cheese, smoked salmon for those omegas, a little bit of avocado, and some veggies in there. And then very simply the likes of a stir fry with some chicken, whole wheat noodles, and lovely flavorings with your garlic, ginger, chili, topped with some cashews to round off the day. This is just to give a sample day and how it does not need to be anything overly complicated. Okay, so I always like to emphasize food, but in some scenarios, as I said, supplements can be worth discussing with either your healthcare professional or your registered dietitian. Really, we do need to think about potentially getting levels checks or bloods checked before we think about supplementing to address any deficiencies. But we know that there are some supplements that might be worth giving a go. So melatonin, just to start, it may help with sleep quality, and we know that rest and sleep is an element. I haven't gone into too much at all really in today's webinar, but with that, improvement in sleep quality can help pain with urination and defecation, pelvic pain, pain during sex, and also cramps during menstruation. So for some people, they find it very useful. Vitamin D. Now, this is one. Now that our lovely summer looks like it's coming to an end. Not to be too pessimistic. Vitamin D is something that from the months of October to March we should all be on anyway. 15 micrograms a day is what's advised, but there might be a argument to suggest getting levels checked, because for some people with endometriosis, they have lower levels, and lower levels of vitamin D can worsen endo symptoms. And you may potentially need slightly higher dosage. You don't want to go out and take the higher dose straight away, because if you have a higher dose over a long period of time, it can actually draw calcium away from your bones. So you want to get it checked, really. Vitamin C and E, they are lovely antioxidants. If there's a combination of those together, it can actually help with fertility as well as pelvic pain and pain during intercourse. NAC is one that may help with endometriosis-related pain and also endometrioma size. And then we talked a lot about omega-3s today. So there is science to say, or research to say, that omega-3 supplementation can be quite beneficial in reducing that pain. But it also is a really useful one to include in there for those who either don't like oily fish or are following a vegetarian or vegan diet, because it's very difficult to get enough of it through the plant-based sources in those diets. Turmeric or curcumin is one that can be beneficial too. Ideally, if we can get turmeric enough through our diet, that can be beneficial, because we don't really know the levels that we should be suggesting for curcumin, which is the kind of strongest form, and too much of that over time can actually hinder our absorption of iron. So again, you can see where there can be a bit of a need for an overview by your healthcare provider when considering supplements. So I've focused very much on nutrition today, and again, I'm conscious of time, so I won't go too much into these, but we need to bear in mind that other lifestyle-related considerations such as exercise, sleep, and stress can have an impact in all symptoms, including the likes of our gut health, pain management, energy levels, etc. So a few of the questions that came in prior to this evening's webinar I've just chosen some of the key themes that came through. First one was, my energy levels are low, especially around my period. Can diet help? The first thing I would say, if you're struggling with low energy levels, a blood test could be indicated to ensure there's no micronutrient deficiencies. So iron's the one that comes to mind first, particularly if you experience heavy periods with your endo. We also want to think about making sure you're eating enough across the day. If you're going long periods of time without eating, it could actually be that you're not feeding yourself well enough. You also want to think about planning ahead so that you can um, still kind of stay on track with your nutrition, your meals, even when your energy levels do dip. I've kind of touched on this one already. Is there any meat that I can include if I'm following an anti-inflammatory diet? Yes, absolutely. Your lean meats like your chicken, turkey, ideally just unprocessed meats. Fish fits into that category really. And then red meat, if you're including it once to twice, just go with the lean options. We've talked about the gluten-free diet. Can that help symptoms such as pain? There was a study that suggested that it did, but it was not a very good study, if I'm honest. There was a lot of limitations, and we don't know that those symptoms were improved long-term or what it did to the gut health. Do it under supervision. And then in terms of I struggle to eat or stay on track during flares or anything, I'm going to do planning in advance, prioritizing your rest, lean on your support system around you as well, and then kind of lean into those balanced meals, those anti-inflammatory foods. That would be my kind of overview of suggestions there. So not to kind of go back over everything we've talked about, but the kind of key take-home messages I was kind of hoping to get across is looking at focusing on anti-inflammatory foods, loads of colour from those fruit and veg. Oily fish are great if not, take omega-3 supplement, nuts and seeds on a daily basis, and then limiting processed foods, sugary snacks, processed meats, kind of plain white refined carbs ideally. Supporting gut health. Constipation is the first one to look at, ideally looking to increase fibre, fluids and movement, and really do seek support if symptoms persist. And then last but not least, I hope the last kind of few slides in terms of practical tips highlight the fact that keeping it simple is often where you get the most sustainable diet for you. Endometriosis is a chronic condition, so finding something that you can stick to long term is far more important. Small changes add up, routines are really important, and try to plan ahead. So thank you so much for listening. I'm conscious I'm a minute over the time now. In terms of if you'd like further support, you can find me on orlawalshnutrition.ie. I work with the lovely team at Orla Walsh Nutrition, myself or the other girls at the practice be more than happy to help. My email address is there, as well as my own nutrition Instagram page, and just for ease I added a QR code if further support is something that might be useful for you.